Alex O'Connor, the famous agnostic YouTuber, recently did an interview with Bear Grylls. If you don't know who Bear Grylls is, he is someone who does adventure-style TV shows like going out into the wild and showing how you survive in the jungle or something like that. And recently Bear Grylls was on a morning British TV talk show and confessing and professing his Christian faith. And Alex O'Connor recently did an interview with him, and it was on his longer format main channel, but the short that Alex O'Connor brought out of that and put on his short or more Alex O'Connor YouTube channel has really blown up and gone viral in the Christian circles particularly, and this always seems to happen when Christians think that Alex O'Connor is closer to professing his faith in Jesus and becoming a Christian. And no doubt because Alex now is a veteran of this YouTube world, he would have titled this video to try and get people to watch. I mean, it's just the way that YouTube is. I'm not saying that he was being deceitful or anything like that. It's just the way that YouTube and the algorithm works. And the way that he phrased the title was, I've realized that Christianity is more plausible than I once thought. And Christians have kind of jumped on this and said, oh my goodness, Alex O'Connor is getting closer and closer to Christianity. And maybe he is. You know, that's a private matter for him to figure out on his own. And ultimately, us as Christians, we believe it's up for the Lord to keep probing at his heart, and for him to one day submit himself to that. But we need to be realistic, or we need to be careful to not extrapolate too much from this. In fact, Alex O'Connor actually responded to his own video, his own short, and said, okay, I'm not a Christian, by the way. I've already got a lot of recent content of why I think Christianity is false, and he would prefer to be able to express his agnosticism without being labeled the next C.S. Lewis. And I think that's fair, but at the same time, I think he must have known what sort of reaction was going to come from this, because he entitled the video, oh, I've realized that Christianity is more plausible than I thought. But what we're missing there is the context, and I think it's important for us as Christians not to over egg the pudding when it comes to things like this. The context of this title really is Alex talking about his move away from the new atheism. When he was a teenager, he kind of got hung up with the new atheist movement, the Christopher Hitchens, the Richard Dawkins, the Sam Harris, etc. And he liked their sort of rhetoric and their arguments, but he realized as he's thought about this more that he's sort of rejected the new atheism, and he's really kind of settled in a good agnostic position, seeking and interviewing Christians and non-Christians and other religious people and trying to figure this out by himself. And I think that's honorable in one sense, but that's the context of the video. And the reason why I want to respond to it is not because I think Alex is a Christian, because he isn't. Not because I think he's closer to Christianity, because I don't know him personally and I can't make that decision. I want to touch on a very significant portion that actually Bear Grylls kind of brought up. So this really is a reaction to Bear Grylls, and the way that Alex responds to it or doesn't really respond to it, I think is quite interesting. But I want to share the screen and have a look at this. And again, I'm not going into reasons why I think Alex is now a Christian or closer. I am none the wiser when it comes to that. But I wanted to talk about when Bear Grylls brings up John the Baptist. And the context of this is, at what moment, if I could go back in time, if time travel was a thing, if scientists can actually figure out time travel, which sadly I don't think is going to happen, but if that was hypothetically going to happen, at what moment would I pick if I had 5 minutes to witness the life of Jesus? And that interaction was very interesting, and I want to have a look at what Alex O'Connor and ultimately what Bear Grylls has to say about this, because I think it's actually very, very interesting. So let's have a look at this together.
Me would say, although, yeah, you want to see the resurrection, you want to see part of me wants to say I would just like to meet him walking along during his ministry and just say, listen, man, I've got 5 minutes.
Yes.
Who are you? Like,
yes. Are you the real deal?
Are you Messiah? Are you God? Are you claiming to be God? Like, that's what I'd want to do. I'd want to ask that question. And I mean, where would you go in Jesus' life?
So
5 minutes.
So it's so interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I think,
What I like about this long pause is Alex is a very good interviewer. No matter who he talks to, he opens up with good questions and he presses people very well. Now, I think some of Alex's atheist or agnostic friends and supporters and fans would probably say that I haven't watched the whole video, so I can't say this for sure, but he was sort of quite soft because I think he realized who he was talking to. He wasn't talking to a scholar. He wasn't talking to a biblical scholar, a theologian, a philosopher. He was talking to Bear Grylls, right? So I think Alex was nice in that sense. He wasn't really pushing him that far because I think he knew his interviewee. So I think he did very well here. But what I like about the pause is that Bear Grylls doesn't really answer the question. He answers it in a very, really, really good way, actually. And actually, I don't know if he was intending to do this. I mean, Bear Grylls is a Christian, but he actually did it in a very good evangelistic way, which I really did appreciate. Let's have a look at what Bear Grylls had to say in response to that question.
So, I mean, if you think of the biblical, so there are a lot of people that did get that chance and did it come exactly for that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You know, say, I mean, one bit you might not have noticed that I really like is John the Baptist's relationship with Jesus. We kind of touched on it, but there's a really nice moment where if you think if anyone in the Jesus orbit is going to believe in him, it's John the Baptist. Known him from birth, kicking inside my mother's stomach whenever Jesus walked in the room. Like, I know this guy is a real deal. I'm baptizing the River Jordan, saying there was one is coming after me is like, you know, I know. And yet when he was in Herod's prison and he gets a chance to get a message to his disciples, the one thing he says is go back to Yeshua and just ask him, you really are who you say you are.
Is it you?
And I love that because, like, if even John the Baptist had doubts because of he's like being tortured and in a brutal prison and like we're human, you know, then I can have doubts. And it's like, he's been a real hero of mine, actually, John the Baptist.
Me too. I think he's my favorite person.
Well, it's interesting you say that.
So
I'd be interested in what I like about him is that everyone always, Jesus says there's no one being greater.
Yes.
He is the number one in the prophets.
That's right.
Very interesting how Alex responds when Bear Grylls says he's a hero of mine, and Alex O'Connor says, yeah, me too. Very interesting. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he didn't mean hero as in, well, he's someone I look up to. Maybe it's just someone he meant hero by saying, I like John the Baptist. He's even said that he's my favorite character in the Gospels. But that is such an important response to Alex's question. Recall that Alex said, if you could go back in time and ask Jesus a question or witness a part of his life, what would you do? And what was fascinating is Bear Grylls, as we've just said, well, actually, John the Baptist, if anybody would have known that Jesus was the Messiah, was who he says he was, John the Baptist would know. But even John the Baptist, before he was going to die, wanted to just double check, just confirm that Jesus is actually the Messiah. You remember the story that Jesus doesn't really say, yes, I am the Messiah, but he says, go back and tell John this, the deaf hear, the blind see, the lame walk. And that is a reference to the prophet Isaiah. And we are not told of what John the Baptist did when he heard that testimony. We assume that John the Baptist's disciples went and told John this testimony. But I can only imagine, and I guess we are left to assume that John the Baptist was satisfied with that response. We don't know. But what Jesus was doing was, John, go back to what the prophets say about me. But you know what? Also, what Jesus did? He gave John evidence. He gave John evidence, reaffirmed the evidence that Jesus is who he says he is. Now, what's fascinating about this is for Alex and any non-believer, it is not the case that you need to have 100% that Jesus is the Messiah to believe that he is the Messiah. Faith is about trust, it's about assurance in what you know. It's about evidence, of course, but in order for faith to really be faith, in order for that relationship with Jesus and that religious walk to really play out, it has to have the combination of both secure evidence, but also the room for insecure doubt. Because I don't think, actually, without this, you can really have that level of faith. And that is what you see, I think, in John the Baptist and his life. Why did the gospel writers include this in there? I don't think they were making it up. It would be very odd for someone to make up John the Baptist doubting that Jesus is the Messiah. I don't think that helps the Christian case at all, theologically, historically. So I don't think this story is made up. But I think what it's doing is it's saying you can make a decision that Jesus is Lord and he is your Messiah without needing to have everything figured out. And that is such a comfort to Christian and non-Christian alike. If anybody had, let's say, zero excuse to doubt, it's John the Baptist. But Jesus didn't respond by saying, John, I cannot believe you are doubting me. Do you not realize who I am? You've known me my entire life. If anybody should believe in me, it's you, and it is not good enough that you are wavering at the very end of your life. Jesus, of course, didn't say that. He just said, go back and tell John this. There's evidence in the prophets, and there's evidence in my life. And that's it. That's the response. So it's a very, very good response from Bear Grylls there. And my prayer is that Alex O'Connor will think about that interaction more clearly. Because Alex said, if I could just go back, yeah, maybe the crucifixion I'd like. Or, but, typically people would say the resurrection. Actually, he says, I would just like 5 minutes with Jesus and say, hey, I've got 5 minutes. Are you actually who you say you are? Now, if Jesus said, yep, I'm Jesus of Nazareth. I am the Messiah. I'm the savior of the world. By the way, I'm God. The Trinity is true as well. Now, Alex O'Connor may come away from that hypothetical situation and say, yep, I'm a Christian now. But we have to remember that John the Baptist had that experience. He had that exact experience. Now, we don't know if John the Baptist said, are you God? Are you not? I mean, being a cousin of Jesus, you would think that maybe that sort of reaction, maybe that sort of question would have been there, but you never know, right? We can't say that for certain. But the point is that there were people, like Bear Grylls says, there were people that had that opportunity. There were people in his family that had that opportunity. There were those in his family that doubted. If you think about James, the brother of Jesus, he doubted that Jesus was in fact the Messiah. So can we actually say that if we went back and asked Jesus if he was the Messiah, would we believe it? I don't think we can say 100% that we would. What's interesting is Jesus, if we looked at him face to face, without, I think, the Holy Spirit giving us that prompting, I don't think we would recognize him as the Messiah. I don't think we would recognize him as God. And I think the reason why is because he just looked like an ordinary human being. One of the reasons why I think he was rejected as the Messiah from some of the Pharisees is because he really wasn't that exciting. Okay, he did miracles and he said fascinating things, but other than that, he just looked like a human. So I question whether, if any of us have the opportunity to go back in time, of course hypothetically, and see Jesus face to face and talk with him, I am unconvinced that that would be enough for Christian and non-Christian alike to confirm that Jesus is actually who he says he is, and he is who we believe him to be. I think faith has a very important extra dimension that doesn't get discussed, because either we think that faith is airy-fairy and believing in Santa Claus is pretty much the same thing as believing in God, or we think that faith is until I figure out every single detail, then I will practice faith. No, I think both of those ends need to be lopped off, and we need to meet somewhere in the middle where faith is the assurance, the trust, and of course the hope too, but it's the trust that there is enough evidence to believe in, but there's also not enough evidence, or just the right amount of not enough evidence to really consider it being something that I can actually put my faith and my trust in. And it's really working out that balance. And I think if anyone is a true agnostic, like Alex O'Connor says he is, I think it's this area that agnostics find themselves in. It's finding out, where is this balance? And is there enough assurance to put my faith in? And is there enough doubt, but not too much, for me to say, yeah, I can actually put my hope in this? Let's see a little bit more of this discussion.
And I always think, we think to be number one in life, you've got to be like a leader. You got to be like, I would think Moses or one of these people, like on top of the mountain, the big beard, the loud voice, the authority. how we're brought up to think these are our people in our lives who are the leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it was the rough one who lived off the land
Camel
and was
skin.
wild and just loved this Yeshua character.
Yeah.
And
Says
he
he's the
said, no
greatest
one
man ever
better.
born of a
Why
woman.
do you like him?
I think he's fascinating because he seems to be this sort of precursor to Jesus in a weird way. He's the introduction to Jesus. There's a bit of mystery as to who he was and why he was baptizing and why he found his way into the wilderness and what it means to preach a baptism for the repentance of sins and why Jesus would need to undergo that. All of these questions are so interesting. There are also communities of people who particularly revere John the Baptist. There's a group called the Mandaeans who are like this Gnostic sect who think that John the Baptist is the most important prophet. Now they see Jesus as a false prophet actually. There's this whole historical fascination with John the Baptist because and it's also the insistence early on that he is not the Messiah. You do it
he
in
keeps
the book
saying,
as well,
I'm not the guy.
which implies to me that at the time there were lots of people who thought he was the Messiah. And
because that's what happened.
And that's true, of course. I mean, there are some who believed. I mean, I think that Bear Grylls is going to mention how when Herod killed John the Baptist, he was, when he heard about Jesus, thought that he was actually John the Baptist raised from the dead. I mean, he was clearly doing amazing things that made people think, at least, that Jesus was not the Messiah and that John was actually the Messiah. But again, like I said, John made it very, very clear. Clearly, he is the Messiah. John is not.
People want to think somebody's great, and then the power goes to your head.
And when Herod Antipas first hears about Jesus, he goes, "This guy is John the Baptist reborn," in the Gospels. And so, what was John the Baptist doing? If when he hears this Jesus guy, it reminds him of John. So it seems like John the Baptist had this incredible ministry, and he must have been doing all kinds of interesting things, and there were all kinds of people who thought he was the Messiah. And so, and we only get clues to that in the Gospels. And so I'd be fascinated. Do you know what? Maybe I'd go to the baptism because I'd love to meet John the Baptist.
With the sky open.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool to see too.
Because if you see that, then you know. Because you can't fake that, So in a way, that's as convincing as the resurrection. Because if you're there and you literally see this guy up in the voice of God going, "This is my son,"
and the dove, you kind of get a proof of the Trinity.
Well, it's like
you get to meet John, then you get to see Jesus. It's all there. I think
you know what?
That
they
might
all
be the
saw
moment.
all these things, and yet the next day
yeah.
they would go, "Well,
not so sure.
The clouds could have." And was the voice? Was it thunder that sounded? And that dove, there had been a few doves around that day.
Never enough. What I do know, though, is
never enough. Very interesting. It's never enough. Yeah, very, very interesting comment there. It's never enough. Bear Grylls is, again, a very, very interesting comment there. Well, again, this is just the human psyche, right? The human psyche would then just start to rationalize what you see. And again, I'll go back to my previous point. Is this just the argument there that if we did go back and we saw all this stuff, we witnessed the baptism, we witnessed the miracles, we witnessed the crucifixion, and we witnessed the resurrection, would we actually still persevere? Would we actually believe it? I mean, it was the resurrection and the witnesses of that really finally convinced the disciples that Jesus was who he says he was. So it's quite interesting when Alex O'Connor and the others say, "Oh yeah, maybe I'll go to the baptism because I can meet these people." Well, the disciples met these people, and guess what? At the crucifixion, they fled. They were nowhere to be seen. When the women at the tomb reported that the tomb was empty, the disciples didn't believe it. When the disciples were witnesses of the resurrection, Thomas, one of the disciples, said, "No, I'm not going to believe that unless I actually physically see it." So what is, again, fascinating in this conversation is that we convince ourselves that, oh, well, if I was there, if I was a follower of Jesus, or if I was an outsider and I saw the baptism and I saw the miracles and I witnessed the crucifixion and I witnessed the resurrection, I would believe that would be enough for me. But it wasn't enough for even the closest followers and family members of Jesus. So I don't think we can sit here as 21st century Westerners and say, well, if I had that opportunity, I would believe. I certainly would have been a faithful follower of Jesus. So what's the moral of this story, really? The moral of the story is, again, faith and having a relationship with Jesus and making a decision to be a Christian is really nothing to do with making sure that we have all of our ducks in a row and all of our evidence and everything perfect. And it's not about blindly living by faith and believing that angels and demons and God and Jesus exists and it's all wonderful. And it gives me meaning to life and I feel happy now. I'm going to go to heaven when I die. I no longer have to fear death. No, it's this wonderful, beautiful balance that God has given us to think about the evidence, think about it clearly, succinctly. Don't be rash in judgments and don't be rash in belief, but also don't the niggly doubts to totally ruin and dissuade you from making the most important decision that you can make, which is finally making a decision of who you think Jesus is. Because, as C.S. Lewis said quite famously, Jesus is either a liar, a lunatic, or he's Lord. He's either a liar, and he pretended to be Lord and he knew he wasn't, a lunatic that he was convinced that he was Lord but he wasn't, or he in fact was Lord. He can't be all three of those things. He has to be one of those things. Another C.S. Lewis famous quote: Christianity is either true or false. It cannot be somewhere in the middle because of the claims that Christianity makes. And the claims that it makes and the decisions that we have to make in whether we believe it's true or false is not a decision that we make after we really consider every single detail when we say, yes, I'm 100% confident that Christianity is true. Nor is it supposed to be a faith there. We go into it blindly and we say, oh yeah, I love all the stories, so I'm going to believe it. It's that balance that we have to find. And my prayer, not just for Alex, but for believers and non-believers alike, is that we continually strive in this understanding of what faith is. And maybe one day that we'll see Alex come to faith, but this video is not one to jump on and say, yeah, he's getting closer. We all, as Christians and non-Christians, have to get closer. And our prayer is that we will continually do that as we consider the richness of Christianity in its evidence and the richness of Christianity in its praxis.